Thank you for joining me for another episode of the PS We Expire podcast. I'm Morgan Motzinger, and today I am speaking with Kim Trathen. Kim is a small business coach, and she has such a powerful and moving story about how she shifted from a 20-year corporate job into business coaching and the tragic circumstances that were the catalyst for making such a monumental change in her life. So we talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about mindset, of course, everything that comes with that, but we also discuss domestic violence. We discuss the details surrounding her best friend's tragic death. So if you have little ones with you as you're listening to this episode, I recommend popping some, headphones in or listening to it another time. We don't get into a lot of the nitty-gritty details about it, so this isn't like a true crime podcast or anything like that, but we do talk about some of those heavy topics like domestic violence. Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of the PS We Expire podcast. If you would take a moment to rate and review this podcast, that helps get more eyeballs and ears on the work that we are doing over on this platform. So thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope that this episode is encouraging and supportive to you today. This is such an exciting conversation for me as I have gotten to know you a little bit more and understand the trajectory of your life moving from a corporate career into owning your own business and how you really like to work with women. And before we hit record, we were talking about the power of entrepreneurship and the amazing opportunity of entrepreneurship. And you told me that you also heavily focus on mindset and that type of work with women. And so can you maybe just fill us in a little bit on what your corporate career was, and then we can talk about the circumstances that made it possible and made it imperative for you to shift from that career into entrepreneurship. And then we'll talk a bit about what your journey looks like right now, as a wife, as a mom, as an entrepreneur, as a self-employed woman, and we can go from there. So talk to me a little bit about
I love it.
Where you started and what that transition was like for you.
Yeah. So I was always a numbers geek. I loved math. I loved stats. And I was a stats major and an econ minor when I was in college, which shocking doesn't actually lead to like the most exciting careers. Maybe I was the only one surprised by that. I don't know. So I found myself working in the actuarial field. And actuaries are the people that do things really exciting, like calculate insurance rates. And that's on the insurance side. I was on the retirement plan side. So like when we used to hear our grandmas and grandpas talk about their pension and how they wanted to stay for 30 years and get their pension, actuaries are the people that are running all of the testing on those plans and calculating the numbers and making sure the plans are run in accordance with the IRS and the DOL regulations. So I spent about 6 or 7 years as a pension analyst in the actuarial department and realized that was not my passion nor my calling. So I slid on over to the 401k department and started working on some different types of retirement plans. Was incredibly unhappy. My joyful, outgoing personality was not necessarily appreciated in that field. And I spent, about 6 years working on 401k plans. And then, as we were talking beforehand, there was a tragedy that occurred with one of my friends. And by way of that tragedy, I ended up finding that I had a real passion for marketing and event planning and this more creative aspect. So I was able to then segue into marketing for the actuarial firm. And I spent about another 7 years as head of marketing at the actuarial consulting firm. So by the time I left there to go full time into my coaching business, I was just a couple months shy of being there for 20 years when I left and went full time into my own business. I like to tell people I was about 4 years old when I started there, since I was there for 20, but not really.
Aging is a gift,
Aging is a gift.
Aging is a gift. Not everyone gets to do it. So every day Every day is a gift. So you had, I mean, we can talk a little bit about this life-changing event for you. As difficult as it is to share some of the details of something that is so deeply painful for so many people. Many of you who listen to this podcast know that one of the things that I really love talking about is how do we be resilient in this life? How do we not allow the hard things to completely capsize us or derail us or make us want to just disconnect and numb out to our lives? When we go through really difficult things, how do we use those as a springboard to jumping into more meaning and deeper purpose, and use those things as fuel to make a really positive impact in the world that we want to? So talk a little bit about what happened, and then what happened in you as a response to that made such a dramatic shift for you.
Yeah, yeah. So back in 2010, one of my friends was murdered in an act of domestic violence. She was going through a divorce, and it was not her soon to be estranged husband that murdered her, but she got involved with her boss at her corporate job. And that turned out to be the man that brutally murdered her. And it was a very complex situation where, because she was supposed to be traveling at that time, nobody realized that there was a big issue. So her body was not discovered for about 10 days after he murdered her. It was beyond horrific. It was violent. It was shocking. As I shared with you earlier, Morgan, I didn't even realize what domestic violence was at the time. I didn't even think that what happened to her was in an act of domestic violence, because I didn't know who this man was. It certainly wasn't somebody she was married to. Like, I thought that was something that happened between like husbands and wives. I learned a lot after that. I learned a lot about abuse. I learned a lot about women. I ended up, a friend of mine and I used to teach Zumba classes, and we ended up creating a Zumba event in memory of my friend Christy. And we raised about $5,500, just the two of us throwing this event together. We celebrated Christy's life. We talked about her death. Her family was involved with it. They supported it. And through that, I became connected with our local domestic violence shelter. And I ended up working a part-time temporary job for them. I spoke at several events. I shared Christy's story. I shared the perspective of a friend that witnessed her within a month of her being murdered. But none of us saw the signs of abuse. We just weren't educated about it. So going through that, I've always been a fixer by nature. My love language would be acts of service, right? Like, this is what I love, doing things for people. It makes me feel good selfishly. I know it makes them feel good. That's always been the way that I have shown my friends that I care about them, or I would go clean for them and things like that. So after her death, I went into service mode. And like, there was a period, right? Shock, sadness. We had to get through the funeral, all of these things. But then as later on that year went, it was like, what can I do? I just kept asking myself, what can I do? Her death wasn't in vain. Like, there's a bigger meaning here. So many women are victimized, so many of them. I'm sure almost every single listener to this right now has some story that's either happened to them, somebody they know, somebody that's made them feel uncomfortable, inappropriate comments at work, right? There's a vast spectrum that happens, but almost every single woman out there has experienced something inappropriate that has been done or said to her. It may or may not fall into the category of abuse. It may. There's emotional abuse, financial abuse, physical abuse, right? There's all spiritual abuse, all different types. But inside of me, I kept thinking her death should be able to help empower, through knowledge and education, other people, right? If we had known the signs of abuse as her group of friends, we may have handled things differently. We may have talked to her about the things that we saw, but we weren't educated on it. So I think one of the biggest ways that it changed me is that in all these different capacities, silence doesn't help anybody. Whether we're talking about abuse, whether we're talking about somebody in need, whether we're talking about advocating for ourselves, whether we're talking about setting our goals, silence doesn't help anybody. Silence doesn't serve. We need to speak up about things that we see. We need to speak up about things that we feel. It's okay for us to be the voice and advocate for ourselves, whether somebody is growing their business and they want to get funding, whether somebody has treated you poorly and you're standing up for yourself, whether you're in a job and you want to advocate for that promotion. But in all aspects, silence doesn't serve. Silence only hurts people.
That is such a good point. And it makes me wonder, why are the reasons that we stay silent? Some of it is that I think culturally we've kind of gotten to this place where there are so many people that have access to our opinions, or have so much access to what we think and we believe, and that there are more people speaking into our lives than ever before in human history with the advent of the internet, So I think that we are even more scared to say things because there's more perceived risk there. When in actuality, if we can remind ourselves that the people's opinions that we need to be most concerned with are the ones that are on the inner circle, and what is required for true intimacy and connection with other people is vulnerability, is not silence, is speaking up. And there are some situations, as we can talk a little bit more about domestic violence, there are situations where it is placing yourself in harm's way if you were going to speak up for yourself. So there are different tactics, different ways of dealing with that than, just saying, well, you need to speak up for yourself. So we'll set that situation aside for a second and talk a little bit about, if you're not in a situation where your physical being is directly in danger, if you were going to say something, I believe that one of the key components to people continuing to be silent about things is shame. Because shame tells you you shouldn't feel what you feel. You shouldn't believe what you believe. It's not okay that you feel uncomfortable here, so don't say anything. It's if I'm going to disappoint anybody, I'm going to disappoint myself. I'm going to put everybody else before me. And also not knowing how to be okay with the uncomfortable feelings that come up when we say something that other people don't like. That's very, very difficult.
It's that fear of rejection.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. That fear of rejection. If you look up age-old studies, right? People are more afraid or as afraid of public speaking as they are death.
Yeah.
Public speaking is not going to kill you, right? Public speaking, but people have this deep innate fear over it. They will constantly rate that so high on their list of fears. And it usually boils down to that fear of rejection, right? Like, what are people going to think about me? What are they going to say? What if they don't agree with me? And it's like, I looked up, I think it was some articles on Psychology Today that I read a few years ago that talked about, like, psychologists were trying to figure out, why is there such a deep fear of rejection? Like, why does it still continue today? And what most of them have surmised is that it goes back to the day and age where, like, if you got kicked out of the tribe, you weren't surviving, right? You needed this village around you. You needed these community of people around you. So the brain is still wired to think that having a group of people around you creates safety. And so it's almost like it flips it then to make you think, if somebody doesn't agree with you, now you're in extreme danger, right? And it's our brains are such complex computers that we have in there, and they're always processing, and they are powerful beyond measure. But sometimes our brains don't serve us in the best capacity.
Right. They need a software update.
Yes.
I highly recommend to my listeners. I talk a lot about this on the episode on people pleasing. So if you want to go back and catch up on what our brains are doing to try and protect us when we get into the habits of people pleasing, I highly recommend listening to that episode. But I think you're absolutely right. We have it in our brains that it is in our best interest to be quiet, to not rock the boat, to make sure that everything just is moving along smoothly.
Yes.
So when it comes
and then as women, on top of that, right? Women are typically, even think about like in school, right? Sit down, be quiet, don't say that, smile. Like on top of, we have all of this inner wiring, and now society conditions, especially women, to fit within the mold, stay within the lines, don't make other people uncomfortable. we are constantly, from the time we're teeny tiny, conditioned to make other people comfortable, right? Help them out. Don't rock the boat. Get grandpa a glass of water, whatever it is, right? We can do things to be nice, but that's different than coming out with this feeling of, I need to stay smaller. I need to stay quiet because I don't want to make other people uncomfortable.
I think in a really obvious way, something that seems like maybe a small thing, but can have far-reaching impacts is when you're a child and you are required to do something that you feel in your body you don't want to do, and you have to do it anyway. So it could be something as seemingly
Yes.
innocent as saying like, go give your uncle a kiss on the cheek, or go give so and so a hug.
Yeah.
And on the inside, for whatever reason, it doesn't really matter the reason, but on the inside you are
Mm-hmm.
you are saying, I don't want to do that, no. And we're being taught to override that internal compass that says,
Yes.
this is what I want to do, or this is what I don't want to do. And so one of the, this is, I love that we're going to talk about this, because this is, as we're dipping into the area of like entrepreneurship and coaching, is that I think that most people get to a point where they come to this point in their life and they're like, okay, this habit of saying no to myself has gotten me
Mm-hmm.
to a place where I don't like what my life looks like. Or they
Yes.
have a health crisis, or they have someone that they really care about get sick or die. And they're like,
Yes.
okay, it's like this shining light on our own mortality that says this life is very short. In the whole scope of things,
Yes.
this life is so short. So what do I want that to look like? And is it in my best interest to continue to do things the way that I've been doing them when I really look in the mirror and say, like, I'm not happy with how things are. So for
Yes. And
you, go ahead.
I was going to say, trusting your intuition, I
Mm,
think, is something that so many women don't do or they downplay. Right. And again, when we talk about like these different gender stereotypes, so number one, so many things have conditioned us not to trust that inner voice, right? Even though seemingly innocent things as kids, it's conditioning and teaching us that I have to do what other people say as opposed to trusting that voice inside of me. And I think that even in like a corporate setting, or especially with entrepreneurship, the number one thing that we need as entrepreneurs is we need to be able to trust ourselves.
mm,
We have to be able to listen to that inner voice. And so many, I mean, if you even look at, so there are so many examples out there of high achieving men that it's like we have this societal belief that women's intuition is like this fluffy, oh, is it real? Is it not? But then you talk to these high achieving men and you'll say, oh, why did you do such and such? Why did you go after that client? Well, I went with my gut, right?
mm,
And they have no qualms about it, but it's not called male intuition. We only talk about women's intuition, and then it's downplayed as opposed to like, this is a real strength that we have. And almost every successful business owner has had some instance where they literally get down to it and they trust their gut. And
mm.
that's what they end up going with.
Have you seen that with, so you shifted from your corporate career into a marketing space within your corporate career, and then
Mm-hmm.
built up your own personal business to coach women
Yeah.
specifically in having their own businesses and the marketing side of the businesses, and then also mindset. So what was it about going through this tragedy of losing a friend in such a traumatic and violent way, that what happened in you in response to that shifted things for you?
Yeah. I think that I want to say there were a couple of things. Number one, like you talked about earlier, like when something tragic or traumatic happens, we lose a loved one or we have an illness, it's like it's suddenly in our face, our own mortality,
Mm,
right? Like it could change in a heartbeat. Something could happen tomorrow. And so first and foremost, I was like, gosh, like my friend was only 32. Like
mm,
there was so much life left that she could have lived. And I remember thinking, like, I'm not going to waste the rest of my days. I'm going to do the things that make me happy. And I didn't know exactly what that was going to look like right then. So it was this like, it was like I was completely unavailable any longer for just going with the status quo
mm,
because that's what everybody says to do. Like I was just done with that. And then there also, I think the other thing that really changed inside of me was like, if something fails, it's not that bad.
hmm,
Like I'm still here. My heart's still beating. I'm still breathing. I still have other opportunities.
The stakes are
My
not that
biggest,
high. Right.
no,
Right.
it's like it like normalized it of like, oh,
Hmm.
right, like it's a lot worse than maybe embarrassing myself on social media, right? Like
Right.
it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
There
It
are
does.
much
It
worse
takes,
things.
yeah, well, and when you go through something so deeply painful and you look it in the face and you feel all the things that come up with that, it really does put into sharp contrast. Like it almost makes you feel so much less fearful about anything else because you're like, I know that I experienced this excruciatingly painful thing and I survived it. And so what can't I do if that's the case?
Yes.
One thing that I picked out of what you just said was that so you had this shift of what am I doing with my life and seeing how short life is and having coming face to face with your own mortality through this event. But what you said was that you didn't know yet what you were going to do about that. And I think that this is
Mhm.
so helpful for everyone to hear that when you go through something like this, it doesn't mean that your life is going to just crumble around you and that you have to completely wipe the slate clean and you have to change everything. You have to change your job. You have to change your relationship. Like all of this change has to happen at once. It more so is like this kind of like this inkling, this really coming back into connection with this part of yourself that says, I believe that there's something more for me. There's something more.
Yes.
I don't know what that is yet. And this is where this perspective and this mentality about failure is so vitally important because it's okay that we don't know what that thing is, but failure is going to help us figure out what that is. And
Yes.
when we become so much less attached to thinking that failing something means that I'm a failure. If we say, like,
Exactly.
oh, failing is just showing me the way, failing is just shining the light a little bit further on this map that shows me where I'm going to go.
Yes.
Because if I fail at something, not only do I learn something about whatever the thing is that I'm doing, but I learn something about myself. Failure is
Yes.
such a gift. And
It
I'm
is.
thank you so much for sharing that just because you had that shift in your perspective that automatically you weren't like, sweet, now I'm on the path and I know what I'm doing and everything's great now.
No. And I feel like the other thing that is so common for people is they think like, okay, I want to do this thing over here. I want to leave my job. I want to start a business. I want to launch a podcast, right? Like whatever it is. And they fall into this trap of thinking that they have to know exactly what the next 25 steps have to look like
Mm,
for them to do that. As opposed to literally like, I just know what my next step is going to be. And going through that experience, something I remember there was a distinct moment I was laying in bed and it suddenly hit me like a ton of bricks. And I had the thought, my fear of regret far outweighs my fear of
mm,
failure. And I thought, I cannot stand the thought of another 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years goes by and I'm still working a job that I'm not passionate about and I don't love.
mm,
I cannot even fathom that. And that was a huge turning point for me because it's almost like, again, failure used to be this huge
mm,
thing to me of like being so terrified of it. And then with my friend's death, it cut it down so far of like, this isn't that big of a deal. And then when I realized my biggest fear is regret, because you can't go back and change something that you regret, that like the past is the past, it's done. You can change what you do going forward. And I thought, that's all I can do now. Like I've been at this job for over a decade, but all I can do now is change what I do going forward. So I wasn't going to sit in that, oh, why didn't I do it 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Or why didn't I choose a different major in college? Like that wasn't going to do any good. But actually realizing like I just can take, and I took a lot of messy steps. I had
mm,
no idea what it was going to look like. I just knew that I wasn't happy with how things were and something needed to change. And it's like doors started to open. There's
mm,
some saying like there are now windows where once there were only walls or something like that.
mm,
I literally felt like that's what happened. Like suddenly there were opportunities. And I remember saying I would talk to my friend after she passed and I really felt like she was guiding me. And so I would tell her, whatever opportunities you bring to me, I will take them, no matter how scared I am. I will say yes to every opportunity. Fear will not stop me. And that's when I met with the executive director of the local domestic violence shelter, and she offered me some mentorship. And I ended up taking the part-time temporary job there. And we formed these events, and we did a couple of them. We created a nonprofit around it. Then I realized I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I just truly felt like part of the joy is getting to see how the next step unfolds. I don't have to have it all pre-planned out.
Yeah. I love what you said about how living in regret is like such a disempowering place, because focusing on regret doesn't allow us to think future minded. It always keeps us stuck in the past. And so when we're talking about something like losing a friend to domestic violence, and saying things like, I didn't know what the signs were. I think that this is a very important place to remind people that it's not their fault if they miss the signs.
Yes.
So having gone through the experience of friends who have died by suicide, it can be very difficult to not feel weighted down with regret of what I should have done differently. Maybe if I had just seen this, I could have prevented it. And it's important to allow ourselves to feel that, because those feelings are natural to come up. But I want to encourage everyone that how powerful it is to use those moments to change things going forward. So for you, what you did is I'm sure you had feelings of regret around, I didn't see the signs. I didn't know what the signs were, but you didn't stay there. You said, okay, what action can I take as a result of this so that I can help people going forward? So there's always going to be there. I think that it is natural for us to have moments where we regret things. Even for instance, somebody that you love dies and they lived a long life, there still always will be a feeling of, I wish that I had spent more time with them, or I wish that I had done this with them, or I wish I had done that with them. So the regret is normal to our human experience.
Yes.
But the goal is to alchemize that, to do something different and to change things going forward. So maybe I will use my feelings of, I wish I spent more time with this person that I love that died, to say, okay, I'm going to be more intentional about the time that I spend with the people who are still here.
And I think where it gets like an extra layer of complexity is when you couple regret with shame. Because now it's like the poisonous cocktail of emotions that we're feeling. So like with what I experienced with my friend, I had so many regrets that I didn't ask her the last time that I saw her, are things okay? Right? There were a lot of regrets around that. I carried so much shame with the fact that the last time I saw her was at a bachelorette party that we were both at. And prior to that, we hadn't seen and talked to each other in like 12 or 18 months. We were on the quote unquote outs. I'm using air quotes, audience. We were on the quote unquote outs with one another. So the shame that I carried that time was lost over some very, very petty 20-something-year-olds things, drama, if we will. And then you put regret in there with the shame. I would say that I did implode for a little bit, where I really caved inward. And then it was like, wow, like that's not helping anybody. That's not helping me. That's not actually serving Christy and her memory. It's not helping her family. Like I literally cannot change the past. All I can do is change what's happening in the future. And I had to process that shame and that regret to get to a space of, okay, now we're moving forward. Things are going to be different now. I'm not going to carry that shame with me forever. I'm going to actually do things in her memory. I'm going to change how I live my life. I'm going to make an impact for other women in all these different capacities. But there was some deep processing that had to happen with regret and shame.
I love that you're sharing that, because I think that many people gloss over that because they don't want people to know how hard it is to process the shame and the regret. But
Yeah.
it's such an integral part of moving forward in a
Hmm.
healthy way, is to allow yourself the time to process those things. So
Yeah.
what I asked you before we started recording was, is part of the reason why you work with women having to do with this complexity around domestic violence and empowering women to
Yes.
be able to make choices when I think a lot of women get into these, are not get into, but are in these situations and feel trapped there for financial reasons.
Yes. Financial abuse is also a thing. Many people in a domestic violence situation, especially if they're married, the finances play a huge part of it.
Hmm.
Yeah, what happened with my friend is the primary reason why I launched my business with the sole aim of supporting women. I sat down when I realized I wanted to help women in some capacity. Like I wanted to be an entrepreneur and I knew it wasn't going to be an e-commerce business. Like I was
Hmm.
just trying to figure out like what is this going to look like? And because I was a stats geek, I sat down and I made a Venn diagram and I had my passions on one side, my skills on the other, and I looked for the overlap. And I remember writing my number one passion was supporting women
Hmm.
because of that experience. And my number one skill that I had was marketing. And I should have kept that Venn diagram. I should have it like hanging on
Hmm.
my office wall now. Um, but I remember looking at that center, like the overlap, and I thought, well, I could help female entrepreneurs. And I remember specifically asking myself and writing down, like, I could either do marketing for them, like done for you services, or I could teach them how to do marketing. And I remember thinking, what is going to make me the happiest 10 years from now?
Hmm.
And I closed my eyes and I pictured myself and I thought, I don't see myself just writing email funnels and creating marketing for people. I see myself making a much bigger impact than that and having a much bigger voice of how I'm supporting women. And again, I didn't know exactly what it was going to look like, but that's when I knew like it's the coaching route. That's what I'm going to do. This is how I will make the biggest impact. And fast forward now, 5 years later, 6 years maybe after the Venn diagram was made, um, it's like, yeah, I had that inclining, I had that nudge, I had that inside voice, and I listened to it. And I'm so glad that I did because I have had opportunities to speak about Christy's story, about domestic violence, about entrepreneurship, about the financial piece. I've been able to impact women across the globe, right? We're in the US, but I've worked with women in South Africa. The economy is very different there, right? It's a much more unstable economy that they live in. And having conversations with money and finances with women across the globe, it has been eye opening to see what some women grow up believing about themselves and what they can do and what they cannot do. And even still today, um, only 27% of traditional business loans in the US are applied for by female entrepreneurs. 73% are applied for by
Wow.
men. Yeah, only 2% of VC funding, venture capitalist funding, only 2% goes to female owned businesses. 98% goes to male owned businesses. That means that in the US, women are 7 times more likely to be raped than they are to receive venture capitalist funding for a tech business.
Have you seen positive trends for women? Are things, in your experience, are things changing in that space?
I think they are. I've definitely in my local community, we have some really amazing organizations here that specifically focus on helping all business owners secure funding, for example. And I think just in the rise of the internet and social media, we each have such a broader audience that we can connect with.
Hmm.
I constantly have women that message me and say, just like your social media content has changed my life.
Hmm.
I met a woman, a local entrepreneur for coffee a month ago, and we had done a consult together over a year ago. And she did not end up hiring me at that time. And we ended up meeting for coffee recently. And she said, I just wanted to thank you and tell you that that consult with you changed my entire life. She
Wow.
goes, I couldn't figure out why my website business, why I was procrastinating, why. And I asked her on that consult, I said, we need to get down to why this business isn't moving forward, or
Hmm.
you're never going to move forward with it. And she said, that question changed everything for me. And now she's running a yoga practice. She opened up a brick and mortar. Like it's this amazing space that she's running for women. And she said to me, if I hadn't done that consult with you, I would probably still be beating my head against the wall of why
Hmm.
my website design business wasn't getting off the ground.
I
Right. We have
love that.
so many opportunities to impact people now where 20 years ago, we just didn't have the ability to do
Hmm.
that.
The couple of things that I hear in that conversation is the silver lining. I mean, there's a lot of negative things about social media, but one of, I think,
Yeah.
biggest positive things is that you see more examples of what's possible for you. So it's like this, if she's doing it, like, well, maybe I could do that too, and
Yes.
it's this like, you borrow belief for yourself for a little while until you build up that self-trust. And then I also heard how important it is to listen to your inner guidance, even if it isn't the thing that you've been doing for a while. She's trying to figure out why this
Yeah.
website design business isn't working, but that's not the business that she has now that is really fulfilling her. And then the last thing is all of our business problems. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're listening to this, all of your business problems are not business problems. It's all mindset, all
Yes.
of it. So whatever's happening in your business that you feel like, why can't I crack this? It's time to do some introspection and understand the areas where you're blocking yourself. So
Yes.
it's, your businesses are a beautiful, generous, sometimes terrible mirror of the internal work that needs to be done. And what a gift that is. And I think that's why I love entrepreneurship so much as the vehicle to introspection and self-awareness, is that you bump up into these things all the time in entrepreneurship where you're not sure if you can do something, or you try something out, or you learn a new skill or whatever. And it's like always developing like this greater self-trust for yourself and building your confidence in a way that you didn't even know maybe you even had that capacity to
Yes.
be so confident in yourself and trust yourself so much.
I
As
love that. I love that. And I love how you said that it's the vehicle for introspection. It's so true. I always share with my clients that your beliefs and your behaviors give you every result in your life and
mm,
business. So whatever is going on, whatever problem, quote unquote problem that you're currently trying to solve in your business, we have to look at what you're believing first. Because those beliefs, what you hold to be true, what you're
mm.
doing or not doing, are driving the actions that you take.
Yeah, your beliefs will never be, or your behavior will never be out of alignment with what you truly believe. And
Yes.
this is where this is so fun to talk about, because there are beliefs that we think that we believe, or we believe with our conscious minds, and then there's like a different set of beliefs that's like running underneath the surface. And if we
Yeah.
don't ever ask what those are, then we're never logically going to be able to push ourselves to the place that we want to be. So our
Yes.
behaviors are always going to be indicative of what we actually, the programming that we're actually running on.
Yes.
Let's talk a
Agreed.
little bit about I just would love for you to share the thing that you're excited about this year in your business, and talk a little bit
Yeah.
about your experience with equine therapy,
Mhm.
and why you're excited about sharing this with people, and how this fits in with your larger goal of empowering women to tap into their intuition, to follow their passion, and to make positive changes in their lives.
Yes. So this year, I am working with my female clients for all of 2023. We're working together for this entire year. And as part of this, what I'm doing for the first time is later on in 2023, we're going to come together for a live in-person event. And I am in talks with and securing that what we are going to do is we are going to fly to Texas, and we are going to be doing energy work with horses.
Hmm.
So the reason why I wanted to bring this to my clients is I got to experience this a yearish ago as like a 3 to 4 hour workshop, we'll call it a 3 to 4 hour event. And it was literally life changing. It was one of the most powerful things that I've experienced. And I walked away from that thinking, this is like the missing piece that I want my clients
Hmm.
to experience. And some of the work that we did in just the 3 to 4 hours, she typically does like 3 to 4 day long retreats. And so we had like a snippet of it at 3 to 4 hours. And one of the things that we did, we went out there, I think there were like 5 of us. that went into out by the horses, and the horses had no saddles, no bridles, nothing, right? They're just out there bareback. And we had to use our energy to figure out what horse we were meant to work with for this workshop. And it was really interesting to tune into how your body felt by the horses, how horses were responding to you. It might just be a little look of the head, right? But really tuning into what the horses, their energy, and then with no other guidance other than don't go behind the horse, right? You don't never want to be on the backside of a horse. With no other guidance other than that, we each had to go out. We had to find what horse we were meant to work with. And then we had to get this animal to pick his foot up. And none of us were able to do it. And we all had to tap into our energy. And we did some exercises where, like, even just like rhythmic with a rope, swinging it back and forth in a figure 8 shape. And it was so funny to see that as we were doing that, pretty soon all of us were swinging our ropes in tandem with one another. And she pointed out, she said, this is what happens when you let your body feel. People naturally fall into rhythm with one another, and you want to fall into that rhythm with your horse. And everybody was laughing because mine was the biggest horse out there, and I'm all of 5.5 feet tall myself. So I had this huge horse and I'm 5 feet tall. We got our bodies in sync and we calmed this energy that we had. I went over, my horse picked up his foot immediately. And then our job, again, they didn't have any bridles, nothing. Our job was to get our horse to take 3 steps backwards. And my horse picked his foot up. And for a moment, I thought, maybe I got lucky. Like, maybe he just wanted to move his foot. I don't know if I really did that. Was that really my energy? Like, all of these things swimming around in our brains. And then I stood in front of him and I put my hands up, and like magic, he took his 3 steps back. And I was like, wow. And that's when I realized, like, this is what we do all the time in our businesses. We think we get lucky with a win. We think we get lucky with an opportunity. We're not exactly sure how we created it, right? Like when I got my horse to pick up his foot, I don't know, did I really do that? Maybe he just wanted to move his foot, right? We do this when we sign a big client or land a big project or launch, like birth something into the world, right? A podcast or a blog or a magazine, whatever it is. And when he took his 3 steps back, I was reflecting on it that night and I realized, like, it was me the whole time. It was my energy of why he wouldn't pick up his foot in the beginning. It was my energy that got in sync when we were doing the figure 8s with the horses. It was my energy and my confidence that easily got him to pick up his foot and so easily take 3 steps back with me doing nothing more than laying my hands on his chest and just connecting with him. It was incredibly powerful.
I think for people that hear the word energy and like kind of tense up right away or feel like that's too woo, that's not for me. I will interject this as a bit of understanding of like neuroscience and psychology, how this works. Over 70% of our communication is nonverbal. So and language has not been part of the human experience for really that long. If you think about like the course of human evolution, like language is a very small portion of this. So we have this wisdom and intuition and understanding and communication abilities in our bodies that is separate from our language. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about this energetic exchange with other people, this energetic exchange with animals, is that we are not aware of how in tune we are with the other person's state, their emotional state, their mental state. And so what happens is when, let's say someone is doing a video and they're posting it on social media and their internal dialogue is, nobody's going to like this. Why would anybody listen to me? I'm a nobody. What I have to say isn't that important, or I'm scared to say this. And you try and sound very confident. The other people are picking up on way more than just what you're saying. They're picking up on the energetics of your body. They're picking up on that nonverbal communication. And so this is where your work with people, where it's not just about the doing, it's about what's the belief underneath that, because it's all intent, like that figure eight, on one side of it, you've got belief, on one side of it, you've got behavior, and you can't separate the two. They're all
Yes.
interconnected. So for people that feel a little bit, weird about this woo-woo stuff, it's not woo-woo at all. This is deep intuitive wisdom that lives in our
Yes.
bodies, and that you're picking up on it, whether you're aware of that or not. I'm so excited, not just for you, but for the women that are working with you, to get to experience such a powerful, tangible event that will make such a wonderful impact on them and really, really drive your.
I think it's going to have a huge impact. I'm excited to experience it for several days instead of just a little snippet. And I wanted to share too, for anybody that is like, what energy? I don't know. This seems crazy. I don't know what they're talking about. I think almost all of us have had the experience where we're in a room and somebody just gives us a bad vibe.
Yeah.
We can't even put our finger on it. It's like, I don't know. I just got a bad vibe from that person. That's their energy speaking to you. Or we've also had the experience where it's like, who's that person? I want to talk to them. Right. Or for parents, for moms that are out there, when you can feel like you suddenly wake up and your child is like right there staring at you. We've all had it. The creepiest parent experience that I think we go through, their energy is what woke you up, right? They didn't say a word. They didn't make any noise, but you startle awake because you can feel them. Or if somebody gets way too close to you and it's like the back of your neck, you're like, I feel like somebody's looking at me. It's all the energies.
Yeah.
And when we talk about neuroscience and how the brain is wired and the body, like scientifically, our cells are vibrating all the time. There is a measurable frequency that our cells are vibrating at that all plays into your energy. I used to tell people I'm not woo-woo. Back in the day, I thought mindset work was for crazy people. And then I got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm one woo, not two. I was like, okay, like I'm seeing the science behind this. I needed like those facts. I needed the science. I needed to learn about the brain for me to understand that mindset work is rooted in science.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what science does, I mean, the fields of psychology, philosophy is not new, but the shift into psychology and neuroscience is it's a fairly new field.
Yeah.
But what we need to understand is that science is only ever putting data and language to things that already exist. So when science is saying these things about our cells vibrating, like that was already always happening. We just have language for it now, so it's this wisdom that is built into our bodies that has been there for millennia, that we're, for whatever reason, particularly in Western societies, that we're kind of obsessed with like understanding the data behind it, the left brain kind of thinking, but it's all kind of coming back together where we're like, oh, some of these ancient wisdom practices and traditions, we're seeing now, like, science is just proving this to be even more true. So it's fun. It's fun to get into a spot where it's like you see the synchronicity and you see how the interplay of everything. And beyond all of this, what I encourage people to do more than anything else is to figure out what works for you. So there are some things that that I'm going to talk about that people are never really going to be interested in. And that's totally fine, because in the same way that like how food affects your digestive system is going to be different than how it affects mine. Lord, I pray that you don't have the same digestive reaction to dairy products as I do.
Well, but apparently we're kindred spirits. I do.
Where for some people they can, have all the dairy and it doesn't impact them in the same way. Like all of these things are so individualized, and this conversation around experimentation and failure applies so heavily to the process of becoming more self-aware, because it is about like trying something and, oh, maybe that's not for me, or trying something and I kind of like that, and it's just sending me on like this little journey a little bit differently. And so you cannot go wrong with experimentation. You cannot go wrong with testing the waters and seeing what works for you, because that's how you find yourself. And that is when you find yourself, that's how you connect with people in an authentic and honest way and create real deep, meaningful intimacy with other people. So just thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Before we disperse, I know we didn't talk a lot about what the signs of domestic violence are, but I'm wondering if you can just share some resources. So if this is striking a chord with someone and they want to understand more about this for themselves or the people that they love, where should they go to look for information to learn more about this?
They can definitely go out to the National Domestic Violence website. They have a
Okay.
lot of resources out there. My local domestic violence shelter is Safe Haven Ministries. So I believe their website is safehavenministries.org. And they can find a lot of information there too. There's so many shelters out there with tons of information. The one thing that I would say to people is one of the biggest signs of abuse is when somebody starts acting out of character. So it never hurts to check in on somebody, right? If you're suddenly seeing them act secret about things aren't quite adding up, trust your own intuition that things aren't quite adding up and that something seems off, and just ask them, right? Just ask them, because that's probably one of the biggest signs.
And I mean, really, if you ask them and really nothing is going on, no harm, no foul,
Yeah,
because that person says, oh, they
exactly.
cared enough about me to be a little bit uncomfortable and
Yes.
ask me how I'm doing, how I'm really doing. So
Yes,
there's no
exactly.
downside to that. Yeah.
No, there's not. It comes down to that, right? Just that connection with people and that self-trust and trusting your intuition. When your intuition is telling you that something is amiss, it usually is.
Hmm.
It may not be domestic violence, right? There might be something else going on, but your intuition is almost always spot on that something isn't adding up.
I think that's such a good point that it may not be the thing that we think it is, but there's
Yeah,
always something there for us to dig into more and understand and reveal a little bit more about how we're thinking about things and what's going on. So thank you so
yeah.
much. And what a pleasure. Definitely going to have you back again, because I know there are so many topics that we didn't even scratch the surface of. So thank you, Kim. And for everybody else, before I go, P.S. We expire.